You're listening to the Fibromyalgia Podcast with Tami Stackelhouse, episode 21. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse. In today's episode, I am interviewing Dr. Jared Younger, who is one of the researchers who is doing some really great work when it comes to fibromyalgia. My interview with Dr. Younger ended up being a little bit long, so I'm going to try to keep this introduction short, though we do have a couple of things that I want to make sure and share with you before we dive into his interview. First, I want to give a quick shout out to one of our listeners in North Carolina. We got an email week or so ago, and I wanted to share it with you because it might give you an idea that maybe you hadn't thought of. She says, "Thank you so much for doing this podcast. Not only has it helped me start to research different things about fibromyalgia, but my husband started listening as well. He gets it now. He didn't believe me about how much pain I'm in on a bad day, but once he heard your podcast, a few of your podcasts from the beginning, he treats me a lot different. He helps me more and doesn't give me attitude when I'm having a really bad day, and I end up sleeping the entire day. God bless you." Thank you so much for sending this in and sharing how this has helped you in maybe some unexpected ways. I love this because that is actually a lot of my hope, is that you would share these episodes with your family, your friends, your loved ones, to maybe help understand a little bit better what you're going through. So thank you so much for that. The other thing I wanted to share with you in this episode, just really quick, because I know Halloween's coming up in a couple of weeks, there is something that I wanted to share called the Teal Pumpkin Project. Now, the Teal Pumpkin Project is kind of exactly what you think it is. It is a teal pumpkin. And this particular color, what it signifies is food allergies. So whether you are someone who has kids, or if you participate in Halloween, have trick-or-treaters coming to your door, then I want you to have this information. If you don't, that's totally fine too, but I would still love for you to listen in case there's somebody you can share it with. So the Teal Pumpkin Project was started from the idea that there are kids with food allergies, and they should be able to participate in fun things like trick-or-treating along with other kiddos. So you probably know some kids who have peanut allergies, but there are also things like gluten allergies. There are kids who shouldn't have too much sugar. There's just all kinds of things that are going on. And the reason I'm bringing up this on the Fibromyalgia Podcast is because of the fact that we know if you have fibromyalgia, your first degree relatives, meaning your kiddos, are also more likely to have fibromyalgia and all the things that go with it. A lot of us do have food allergies, so I think this is something that you guys are going to want to be aware of. So the Teal Pumpkin Project is all about taking this cute little teal pumpkin and putting it outside your front door to let people know that you have non-food items available for trick-or-treating. Now, my parents have participated in this ever since I discovered it a few years ago. And so I interviewed my mom a little bit to find out, what their experience has been using the teal pumpkin. And so I want to share that with you. She said that they have actually chosen to only give away non-food items because, she feels like it makes the kids feel good to know that anybody who comes to their door gets the exact same choices. It's the kids don't have to choose the right things, right? And if from your own experience, maybe you shouldn't have that chocolate cake, but having to make the choice continually to not have it can sometimes be trouble, right? And sometimes we don't make good choices. So I love that my parents just give non-food items. They also have a sign that they post outside their door that explains that that's what they do at their house. And she said that the Teal Pumpkin Project is getting popular enough that she can actually hear some parents say, "Oh, look, there's a teal pumpkin." Now, you might wonder, what kids are going to think when they come to the door and they don't have the usual selection of goodies to choose from. And I will actually post a few pictures that my mom sent on the show notes page for today's episode. So just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com/21. You'll be able to see a few of those pictures. They include all kinds of different things when they open the door to trick-or-treaters. A lot of the things they use are like fun pencils, cute little erasers. Mom said that her favorite quote from one of the kids that came to visit them was from a junior high girl who came up the steps, and she looked in the goodies and she said, "Oh, stickers! I love stickers!" So they've got stickers in there. They've got like super balls, all kinds of different things in there, but just non-food items. The important thing to keep in mind if you want to go this route is, first off, you don't have to go completely to non-food items like my parents have. You can actually have both. The point of the Teal Pumpkin Project is that there are options that are not food, not that you're only non-food items. So the Teal Pumpkin participating, that's the word I'm looking for, participating in the Teal Pumpkin Project just means that you have options for kids who have food allergies. So take a look. A great resource for you if you want to participate in this is just to go to tealpumpkin.org. I will also include that link in the show notes. They've got that sign that you can print out, the one my mom said she puts outside the door. They've got yard signs you can stick out. They've got coloring pages. You could actually give those away to kids. They've also got suggestions for some non-food items and even for fun community projects you can do. Like, instead of buying a teal pumpkin. I actually got this one at not Costco. I got this one at Target for just a few dollars. So it's a lot of places will even have them, but you can also paint your own if you want to do, a jack-o'-lantern or something like that. You can actually do it teal. So there's a lot of resources out at tealpumpkin.org. And I think that with everything that we're learning, this also kind of ties into my interview with Dr. Younger. We are finding that the foods that we eat affect a lot of things. It's not just that idea of, eating peanuts, going into anaphylactic shock, needing, your EpiPen. It's a lot of other things as well. And that can lead to inflammation, that can lead to stomach issues, not feeling good. So having other options out there, I think, is just healthier in general and just good all the way around. So I wanted to share that with you. My mom said that a lot of I'm stumbling over my words here, you guys, sorry. My mom said that a lot of the parents that come past their house, a lot of times they will come up and thank them for having non-food options. Those of you who have kids who come home with bucketfuls of candy, and then you have to like dole them out so your kids don't go into a sugar coma, you can just see where it's just kind of a cool idea to have a different option. So go take a look, tealpumpkinproject.org or just tealpumpkin.org. Both will get you to the same place. There's all kinds of information out there. So if you haven't already decided what you're doing for the little spooks who knock on your door on Halloween, go take a look at that. Okay, you ready for my interview with Dr. Younger? I've been looking forward to this for weeks, months. It took a while for his schedule and my schedule to coincide. He was teaching some summer school. So we finally just did our interview today. And for those of you who aren't familiar with his work, he does a lot of research on fibromyalgia. That is the focus of his work. And he does, that was actually one of the questions I asked him in the interview was, why fibromyalgia? So you'll get to hear about that when you listen to the interview. Dr. Younger is the director of the Neuroinflammation, Pain, and Fatigue Laboratory at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And their lab, they do a lot of different things. Primarily, they are studying right now neuroinflammation, which is inflammation in the brain and the nervous system. So they use neuroimaging, so imaging of the brain. They use some pharmaceutical and immunological techniques to understand and treat chronic diseases like fibromyalgia. Dr. Younger completed postdoctoral fellowships at Arizona State University and Stanford University School of Medicine. He was an assistant professor at Stanford for a while and is now at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Dr. Younger's goal is to end the chronic pain and fatigue that is caused by inflammation in the brain. And he talks a lot about that in our interview, about why he is convinced that a lot of what's happening with fibromyalgia is that inflammation in the brain. And he talks about the research that they're doing to both confirm that hypothesis, that that's true, but also track down exactly what's happening there. Like, just to say there's inflammation in the brain, well, how did it happen? Why did it happen? How do we track that? How do we undo that? So those are all things that he is researching. So listen into the interview. At the end of the interview, do stay tuned. I will just do a quick recap at the end, give you some of the, he mentions a few links. I will recap those at the end, and also tell you what you can look forward to in the next few episodes. All right, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Younger. I really appreciate you doing this interview.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So as I mentioned in your introduction, you have been doing a lot of the exciting research, I think, on fibromyalgia for the last few years. And that's really the main reason that I invited you to join us, is to kind of give us an update on what you're doing and what's happening in the world of fibromyalgia research. So, but my first question for you is, why fibromyalgia? What got you interested in this disease specifically?
Yeah, we have to go back quite a ways to get to that. I was a postdoctoral fellow in Arizona State University, so I knew I wanted to do pain. I had done a lot of pain stuff in graduate school, and we were using different techniques, even things like hypnosis and things like that, which work in some people but not everyone. So I was really fascinated about how aspects of the brain can, control pain. So when I got to the postdoctoral fellowship, they were looking at rheumatoid arthritis, and they were looking at fibromyalgia. And of those two, I could see that, the rheumatoid arthritis, we had a good idea what was going on. So there wasn't as many mysteries to solve. And also, there were good treatments for it. But at that time, there was nothing for fibromyalgia. So when I saw these patients with fibromyalgia and participants in the study, I realized they had no good treatments, no good options that their clinicians could give them. So from a human point of view, there was a lot of suffering that needed to be solved. But then on top of that, scientifically, we didn't know anything about what was going on, especially 15 years ago. So there was a great scientific need as well. So when I had those two options, I just gravitated toward the one that had the greatest need. And so I've been doing fibromyalgia ever since then. And my mission for that has been to figure it out. Wherever that is, if it's in the body, if it's in the spinal cord, if it's in the brain, what is actually going wrong, and then how do we fix it? So it's been driving me since then, and I've branched off into things like chronic fatigue syndrome, which I think are related, and those are natural extensions from the fibromyalgia work, but it's all the same thing. And then I've focused on inflammation in the brain because that's just where the results from the experiments have led me. I think we get closer and closer, we start to hone in on the core problem, and then we can develop something that's actually going to fix it.
Totally. I read a couple of interviews that you did leading up to this, just so I know what questions
Hmm.
to ask you. And one of the things that you said I really appreciated, which was that a lot of the strategies out there for fibromyalgia right now are simply to help us cope, but that
Yeah.
you
Hmm.
actually want to fix it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was what I saw again in the postdoctoral fellowship. It was they were testing things like mindfulness and you know yoga and things. And yes, sure, you might get some benefit from that, but you're compensating for things. That's not fixing the root problem. And so that's great as a kind of a, or maybe not great. That's good as a kind of a band-aid or something to do while we wait for the good treatment. But obviously if people are really going to lead full lives like they did before they were kind of stricken with these conditions, we have to correct that core problem. And that's not going to be, I believe it's not going to be mindfulness or yoga or something like that. It's going to be a physiologic thing where we've got to flip a switch or direct something or take a cell and push it into another direction to actually get people back to where they were before things went wrong.
I totally agree with that. One of the things that I believe is that if you're really going to live your best life with fibromyalgia, there's kind of three areas to address. We do have to talk about our lifestyle. How we eat,
Mm.
how we take care of ourselves. If you lived like I used to, pushing myself all the time,
Uh, uh,
that's obviously no good. And we do have to talk about things like mindset, how you talk to yourself,
yep.
how
Hmm.
what you think about your body and your illness. But at the same time, the third piece is exactly what you're talking about. There's really something going wrong in our bodies, and we can't not address that. We
Right.
also need more than just that. So,
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us about some of the work that you've done, and you said that the research has sort of led you to inflammation in the brain. Take us on that journey. Tell us that story.
there's
15 years and
there's
15
so much to
seconds, right?
talk about. Um, you know, so going about this as a scientist, we basically we sit there and we read all the literature. We're like, what's the best guess I can come up with what's wrong? And at the very start, I was looking at all the fibromyalgia symptoms that are the most common. So the musculoskeletal pain and the fibro fog, the brain fog, with some memory, concentration, word finding, things like that. The fatigue, the general malaise, um, some depressed motivation, depressed mood. Um, I basically line those up on a page and then look to see what out there has those same symptoms. And I've told the story before. I don't know if everyone's heard it, but when I did that, basically they lined up one to one with something called the sickness response, which is what happens when you get the flu. And these are the behavioral aspects of getting sick. And they happen because our immune cells in our brain, when they activate, they release chemicals that change the function of neurons in our brain to make us feel sick. And it causes headaches, it causes you to have increased pain sensitivity, fatigue, lower motivation, lower mood, the same thing. And so they lined up one to one. And so my starting point was, well, if I'm going to look at something, this idea that these cells are activating in the brain, just like when you get the flu, that's a good starting point because it looks the same behaviorally and people report it the same. A lot of people with fibromyalgia will even
Hmm.
say, this feels like a flu that doesn't go away. And there's a lot of similarities. So that's not a coincidence. That's a good starting point. So from there till now, it's been systematically saying, okay, if that's truly what it is, if I do this experiment, what's the result going to be? And then I kind of go through this process of doing the experiment, seeing what happens, and then adjusting course. There's so many studies we could talk about. Gradually, I've been getting closer and closer to the brain. It's everything I've done, the results have led me um, to the brain and to inflammation in the brain. So I started off in the body, but that's mostly because it's really hard to do inflammation in the brain. If people are doing animal research, they can have their rat model or mouse model and they can actually get the brain tissue. I don't do animal stuff. You can't do that in a human. You'd have to remove the brain. So I did blood tests in the body first. And, one of the things we found is that if you have fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, when you have bad days for yourself, I mean, maybe you might consider all days to be bad, maybe, but for yourself, on your worst days, the inflammatory signals in your body are heightened. And so that tells me it's an inflammation thing. But the signals we saw that were elevated were things that we know cross the blood-brain barrier and cause those cells in the brain to activate, and things like leptin, which is one of the primary things that we see that correlate with fibromyalgia pain and chronic fatigue syndrome fatigue. So I've just been following that line, and we can talk about a lot of the different studies, but where it's taken me to now is actually creating new ways to image the brain so we can finally see the problem of fibromyalgia. We can actually take a single individual, just like you can do a brain scan for a tumor or something, and say, there's the tumor. We want to be able to do a brain scan and say, there's the fibromyalgia, there's the pathology. And I think we're really close to that. So we're at the point now where we can use MRI, or which is magnetic resonance imaging, or PET, which is positron emission tomography, and get the same answer with both of those completely different scans to show the neuroinflammation when someone has fibromyalgia. So it's taken me a long time because there was a lot of technical hurdles with that, and it's just science is really slow. But now it's pretty exciting because now we're getting to the point where we actually have that. And then once you have that objective test for fibromyalgia, that's going to change everything. Because if you had a clinician who didn't take you seriously, they will, as soon as there is a test that shows it. They're not, I don't think anyone's biased against it. They're just waiting to have something objective and something clear, and then everyone will be on board with it. And then that'll indicate treatments. And once there's a good treatment for fibromyalgia, yeah, every clinician's going to want to use it. They'd be more than happy to make their patients happy. They're just waiting for the right tools. So that's what I'm doing.
Right, right. And one of the things I heard in what you were just saying is that part of the journey and part of what's taken so long is you've actually had to also create the tools to study things. Not being able to actually look inside somebody's brain while they're still alive, is a bit of a hurdle, right?
Yes, right. Yeah, there's no tool for it. There's you cannot go to your clinician and say, can I get a brain scan for neuroinflammation? Even though it makes sense that it exists, because you can measure inflammation anywhere in your body. Of course, it's going to happen in people's brains as well. But science has not developed tools for medical professionals to use as part of a screening. And they desperately need that, because it's not just fibromyalgia. It's after traumatic brain injury. A lot of those people clearly are going to have neuroinflammation, but you have no way to know that. We have evidence that as people get older, the brain naturally kind of gradually becomes more inflammatory. And so a lot of their fatigue and cognitive stuff, that may be brain inflammation. All kinds of conditions we can look at if we just get that available. So now we have it developed. We just have to validate it and make absolutely sure, so we can tell a clinician, if you do this scan and you get this result, that means neuroinflammation without a doubt. And we're not at that point yet, because there's a lot of tests you have to do, but that's what we're working towards.
Oh, that's so exciting. And I think so many patients can relate to what you were saying a minute ago about doctors not understanding, right? Because you can't see it and we look totally fine.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the big problem has been a lot of people with fibromyalgia, they hurt in their muscles. And so the clinicians and the scientists were looking in the muscles and saying, there's nothing wrong. And that's true. I don't think there's any pathology in most cases. There are some cases where people have polyneuropathies and things that could look like fibromyalgia. That can happen. But in most cases, the body is fine, and they didn't have the ability to look in the brain. So as far as they could tell, everything looks normal. I do understand, but I wish, even now, I wish all clinicians understood that our brain controls everything, and you can create any problem with just your brain, because everything we experience has to funnel through that. So you can absolutely create pain just with a brain problem without anything wrong in the body. And we know that as, pain specialists, but not every clinician knows that.
And just to be clear for the people who are listening, you're not saying it's all in our heads, like it's not
No.
imaginary. There's actually something wrong in the brain. It's all in our heads in
Yeah.
the sense that if you didn't have a brain, you wouldn't even be alive and there would be no experience.
Yes. It's just that, so for an example, so you're absolutely correct. When if you take a pen and you poke your finger, you feel it in your finger, right? But that's not actually true. That's an illusion that our brain creates. You can't feel something in your finger. We have a map of our hand and everything else that's inside a particular part of our brain. And when those neurons activate, it makes us feel like something hurts in our finger. Well, that means it's being generated by the brain. So if there's some reason why those neurons are firing in that region, it'll make someone hurt in their body when there's nothing wrong with that finger. And so that's what we're talking about. Definitely, it's not saying it's a psychological event. It's a neurological event. It's problems in particular regions of the brain that can be corrected that are generating that pain experience.
Yes, exactly. I really wish more people understood that it is all in our heads, but it's not imaginary.
Right. Yes. Yeah. A huge difference there. I mean, really everything's in our heads. But yeah, that phrase has been kind of co-opted to mean something else, but yeah.
Right, exactly. Would you talk a little bit? When I first started hearing your name was actually back looking at the use of low dose naltrexone for
Hmm.
fibromyalgia. And I've mentioned that a couple of times on the podcast, and
Oh.
it's an interesting enough thing that we probably should devote a whole episode to LDN only. But would you just talk a little bit about that as part of this journey?
Wow. Yeah. Um, so after I formed that initial hypothesis of these cells in the brain being abnormally activated, my next question was, well, okay, if that's true, then if we give something that we know pushes those cells back into their normal state, that should make people with fibromyalgia feel better. So that was a hypothesis I had. Then I had to search for, what could I test that hypothesis with? What is
Right.
something that we could give a human that has been demonstrated to do that to those cells? And so I researched for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and came up with a list of about 20 things. Some of them didn't cross the blood-brain barrier. Some of them had never been used in humans. So I was Xing things out. No, 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 no. Um, what I was left with was low-dose naltrexone, which fit all the boxes I had. There was enough research to show in animals and also in cultures, like, you can do cell cultures, that it did what I thought it should do to the cells. It's been used in humans for other reasons for a long time, for opioid antagonism. And so it's safe. We know it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And so I decided this is the thing that's going to test. So I originally didn't think about it um, as a treatment. Originally, it was originally a test of a hypothesis. If someone with
Ah,
fibromyalgia takes this and they get better, that means what I thought was wrong was correct. And so the initial study was really small. I think we just did 10 people in the first study, which is usually how I do it. I start small, and if it works, we get bigger. So
so
when
you
I did
weren't
that,
actually testing low dose naltrexone. You were actually
right.
testing, am I right about, is there inflammation in the brain?
Yeah, yeah. Now you get to do
Interesting.
both at the same time,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was my it was it was premature to test it as a treatment. So when we did it, the response rate was about 60%, and
Yeah.
so it worked better than I thought it would. And we do these things in a really meticulous fashion, and so we take symptom reports. You can see this in some of the papers every day. So not only can we say, hey, you feel better after you take the drug, we can look at the trajectories. We can see how fast it drops, and that most studies don't do that. And I could see the effect. And since it was placebo controlled, I could see when they were on the placebo, and I could see what happens when they switched over to naltrexone. And it was a true physiologic response. So once I saw that, I knew that the hypothesis was correct, but then I also realized we had a potential treatment that people needed to know about. That's why we got some money from the American Fibromyalgia Syndrome Association to do the larger version, because I was like, okay, we need to replicate this, show that it's actually true. And we got the same results with the second study and get that information out there. And I think I have no idea how many people are taking low-dose naltrexone. Now, it seems like a lot because I get questions about it, but I don't know if it's 100,000 or 500,000. I have no idea. Of
Right.
course, you have advocacy groups like in the UK that are promoting it. So, and that's a lot of it. So it looked great. I wanted to do more with it. Like the next step is to run it on 400 or 500 people, do a huge clinical trial. And once you do that, the clinicians feel more confident in using it. And so I know if I run that huge trial, they would do it, but it's really tough to get money for those multi-million-dollar studies. Usually drug companies do that. And so I knew at the time there were a couple of drug companies that were looking at it, and so I just let them have it. And I said, well, I think my work's done. At least let people know this could help. So now these companies are going to do it. I was hoping they would get out a product, but they haven't. So I don't know where that's going. So it might be time to come back and say, okay, if you're not going to do it, maybe we do need to try to get the money and run a huge trial that will be kind of give the definitive answer for it. But I'm convinced, because now we've done 3 studies, and I did one after that where we measured the inflammatory stuff in the blood, and we could see that low dose naltrexone decreases it. So every time I test it, we get the same results. So you know, I think if I can never give medical advice. I'm a scientist, not a doctor. But if I had those symptoms, that's the first thing I would try, because I know from the participants that most of them handle it very well, and there's a good chance they're going to respond. Of course, not everyone does. So now what we're doing is trying to find, if naltrexone didn't work for you, what else might? So we're halfway through a dextromethorphan trial. And I don't know if you've heard about that one, but dextromethorphan also changes the function of those cells that we think are abnormally activated. The cool thing about dextromethorphan is that it doesn't interfere with opioid receptors. So naltrexone, people are scared to take it if they're on hydrocodone or oxycodone or something.
Right. Yeah.
But dextromethorphan you can take with it. They don't conflict. So we're going to have finished that trial in February. And so maybe we're going to have another treatment that people can use. I don't know yet, but we'll have an answer mid next year.
That's cool. That's cool. I personally have been on LDN
Mm.
since 2011, I think. And it's one of those things that it seems like the longer you're on it, the better it works.
Mhm.
And that it works for a bunch of different things. I also have Hashimoto's, autoimmune thyroid, for those of you who are listening who don't recognize that. And so it helps with both things quite a
Oh,
lot.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does have actions in the periphery as well, because there's cells like the microglia in the brain, but in the body that it can reduce. And when we look at inflammation in the body, it goes down. And there's studies with Crohn's disease and so inflammatory bowel things, and it responds to that too. So it looks like a anti-inflammatory, similar to how you would think of ibuprofen or aspirin or something, except it also works in the brain, not
Mm,
just in the body. So not exactly the same mechanism, but it's a similar way of thinking about it.
cool, cool. So, with the studies that you're doing now, looking more specifically in the brain and the scans, the technology to get there, what are you hoping to discover? What are you thinking this will give us?
So so again, it's just about a tool for clinicians, but what we're hoping to find. Um, Again, I keep saying this, there's so many studies, so I have to think about which one to talk about first. So one of the ones is the positron emission tomography, and those cells I've been talking about are called microglia, and they have different states. They actually change shape. When they're in the normal state, they have these long kind of arms that look for problems. When they find a problem, they pull in those arms, they kind of become circular, and then they change the receptors on their surface, and they start to pump out a bunch of chemicals that make us feel sick. The cool thing about them is when they change into that circular shape, that activated inflammatory state, those receptors change in a certain way that we can detect. And so they're called translocator protein receptors. So you don't have to worry about that. What's important is that there are chemicals we can inject, radio tracers that go to that receptor. And since those cells really only express that receptor when they're activated, if we inject it in your body and we find a bunch of the signal in your brain, that means a lot of the microglia were activated. Does that make sense? So it means they've changed into that activated state and they have those receptors. So we're doing that first. We will bring people in with fibromyalgia, healthy controls, and see if their brains are kind of lighting up with a lot of this radioactive signal we injected. I know that sounds bad, radioactive. It's just positron emission tomography. It's less than an X-ray, so that's how it works, and that'll be pretty straightforward. Another one that is more experimental. I can talk about it just a little bit, but we think that in fibromyalgia, the immune cells from the body are actually breaking into the brain and causing the inflammation. So we're supposed to have immune cells for the brain and different immune cells for the body, and they're not supposed to mix. The brain ones shouldn't get in the body ones shouldn't get into the brain. But we think that's happening in fibromyalgia. There may be a little weakening of the blood-brain barrier, and those cells are getting in. Once they get in, they don't know what to do because it's not their environment, and so they get activated, and they can cause these experiences of being sick. So we're going to pull the cells, so do a blood draw, isolate those cells we think are getting into the brain, and then we can incubate them with another tracer, inject them back in the body, and then wait a few days and scan the brain to see if those cells made it into the brain. So if that works out, if we find those cells in the brain, that's going to be huge. That's going to tell us there's abnormal infiltration of peripheral immune cells. Then we're going to have a true target to go after. That means we can try to strengthen the blood-brain barrier. We can try to go after those cells. We can try to find out why they're being called into the brain, and that'll be huge. We have no idea if that's what's wrong, but we know we've got the scan working, and so we will probably, we should start scanning in January, and we'll probably do it in 5 months. So by summer of next year, I think we're going to have an answer of whether that's actually what's driving the symptoms of fibromyalgia.
That's fascinating. As you were talking, it made me think a little bit of leaky gut, right? Where
right.
things so we have leaky brain too.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Right. In fact, that we knew there was leaky brains before we knew about leaky guts. Yeah. So if you have inflammation, the blood-brain barrier kind of creates these gaps, and then things can get in. That's what happens in multiple sclerosis as well, which is a really serious disorder. The difference is in multiple sclerosis, the immune cells are actually attacking the neurons because it's an autoimmune disorder. In fibromyalgia, we do not think that's the case. It's not attacking the neurons. They're just kind of globally releasing pro-inflammatory stuff. So fibromyalgia is not as serious a disease in terms of damage as something like multiple sclerosis. So as far as we can tell when we scan the brain, once we correct that inflammation, the brain is good. It'll be as healthy as if you didn't have fibromyalgia. Whereas with multiple sclerosis, you can't really, in Alzheimer's and things, Parkinson's, there's actually damage occurring. So you can't say that as much. But that's the good news about fibromyalgia, is we think it's totally correctable. But yeah, with the leaky gut, I think this is all a series of things. So if you have the wrong balance of, kind of, I don't know if you call them microbiota or flora or however you want to refer to this stuff, and it turns inflammatory and you have leakage of, lipid polysaccharide or endotoxin, really, that can lead eventually to brain inflammation. And now gut inflammation has been linked to rheumatoid arthritis, and even inflammation in the gums have been linked to heart disease, and now it's been linked to Alzheimer's. So we're seeing all these links between peripheral inflammation migrating into the brain and causing even worse things. And so that's a huge thing in terms of what you were saying about lifestyle changes, anti-inflammatory. Even if you can't target your brain directly, if you reduce inflammation in your body, you're probably going to down the line help inflammation in your brain too.
Right, right. And I was just wondering, like, if you start making these changes yourself, looking at reducing inflammation, reducing all the things that contribute to inflammation, how long does that process take before you start actually seeing results of that? If we're talking about things that are happening in the brain.
Um, the research is that we do suggests a minimum of 3 months before you start feeling, if you're directly targeting the central inflammation. So, for example, low-dose naltrexone should take about 2.5 to 3 months before someone can kind of tell if something's kicking in. As you mentioned, it's a long process, and because you're correcting fundamental processes, you should continue to get better the longer you take it. And so it does take a while. It's not like taking a painkiller for an injury or something, which can work in 45 minutes, or something for a headache sometimes. So much slower, but more fundamental. You're not, a lot of painkillers, you're kind of covering up pain, but we're talking about actually correcting the abnormal problem to begin with. If you're trying to correct it with dietary stuff, it could take longer because you've got more steps in that chain. And so,
Hmm.
that you've got to correct the peripheral stuff. It's got to have time to move through that system, change what's circulating in your system, and then eventually get to the brain. So I don't know, because I haven't done that research, but I mean, it could easily be something where something that's truly helping, you might not know until like 6 months later the true impact of that. And so, I mean, I guess that's an argument to, once you've decided to embark on a particular lifestyle change, you have to stick with it, even if after the first month you're like, this isn't helping.
Yes, that is one of the things that I've seen as I've been coaching people, is that
Mm,
we we're we're obviously desperate to feel better, right?
yeah.
And so I think a lot of times we give up too quickly. We'll do something for a short while and say, well, that didn't
Yeah.
work, but also not having the understanding of how long it should take,
Yes. Right.
right? So,
And their effort, it's a lot of effort. And if you're putting an effort into something and you're not getting any return, it's just, for anything, it's hard to keep that up. So, but you're right. If we could actually say, if we could research some of these things and say, hey, we know that you're not going to feel better until 6 months, but at 6 months, you probably will start to feel better. I think that would really help people. But we need more of that type of research. We need more dietary change research. So, reducing the fats and salts and sugars, what does that actually do for fibromyalgia? What if you did all that? What can you expect as a reward for all that kind of work of giving up those foods? And there's not enough research to know the answer to that. So do it.
right. And it seems like so often we end up with contradictory things, right? Especially when it comes to
Mm,
diet. We'll have some people who like, oh, vegetarian diet, you feel so much better. Oh, paleo, you feel so much better. When really maybe it's just about what you've removed, not about what
yeah,
you're
yeah.
actually eating.
That's a great, yeah, it could be, and it's different for different people. That's the
Yeah.
problem. So for someone, it could be some particular protein that's in a set of foods that you don't even know are linked, because you don't know what proteins are in that. And then there's some obvious ones like certain grains or certain dairies where you don't have like an allergic response, but you have an intolerant response to it. And I think that could do it. So yeah, eliminating. So, I think tracking symptoms over time to see if there's any variation. And then if you see, hey, why on these days were my symptoms relatively better, then you can start trying to figure out what was different on those days. And then if you can find out what those things are, then maybe you could eliminate it mostly. Um, so, I've used an example before. If it was milk or something, or dairy, maybe you have coffee every day and you have milk. And so you've got that kind of trigger, but on certain days you have more milk. Maybe you have cereal or something, and then you have worse days. If you don't track that, you may not realize that, but that could say, hey, eliminate all milk, and maybe you'll feel a lot better. I'm not suggesting that, just as an
As
example.
an example, yeah.
Yeah.
I as a similar example, there was a client I worked with several years ago, and we were trying to track some of this down. So she kept a food diary and sent it to me every week. And by tracking it, we were able to discover that every time she ate tomatoes,
Yeah.
she had a higher pain day 2 days later.
Yes, right.
So there was
That
no way
exactly.
she was ever gonna
Yes.
discover that without tracking, because like 2 days ago, I don't know what I ate,
So absolutely. 2 days is is a very logical physiological window for a number of reasons. That makes it really hard for people to track. The other one are interactions. It might be when you have dairy or tomato and you you physically exert yourself over a certain amount, or you do that and get into the sun. It could be two things, and then it's really hard to figure that out. And yeah, I submitted a grant to the National Institutes of Health once. What I wanted to do was have a program you could have on your phone where you track as much stuff as you can, and then a machine learning algorithm analyzes everything to look for the things that you say. Is there any 2-day lags between doing something and having effects? Is there any interactions? Way more than a human could do by looking at it. And then it will send a report to you saying, hey, guess what? We found something that reliably predicts your bad days. I thought it was a great idea. They didn't fund it. So I don't know.
I think
Maybe
it's a
we'll
great
try
idea
again.
too.
So I think it's really hard to do, but now the
Yeah.
computers are good enough to do that. So may revisit that and see, because you wouldn't have to think about it. You just record what you eat, record what you're doing, like what you're already doing. It's just that a computer then goes through it to try to find patterns.
Yeah, yeah. It's really pattern recognition is what we're
Yeah,
talking about.
exactly. Right.
And
Yeah.
and for those of us like me who tend to be good at that, like I can help clients with that because that happens to be a skill I have. But
Yes.
not
Yeah.
everybody has that kind
Right.
of a brain. So
Yeah, and they don't have access to a clinician who thinks that way.
yeah.
And I think that's one of the major problems is when, I know a handful of people who can do what you're describing and do it really well, and they can work wonders for their patients, but then their schedule gets filled up, and I don't know where to send people in different parts of the United States for that.
Yeah.
So, like some more people to refer patients to.
Yes, exactly. And that's been a challenge for fibro patients everywhere.
Yeah.
Is that there just isn't enough being taught about it. I don't think that there's enough clinicians who really understand, not just like even diagnosing it and recognizing it. Like that's one challenge. But then now that you've diagnosed somebody, how do we actually help them get better? And a lot of the things that I at least have found that work the best, things like low dose naltrexone, just aren't part of the
No.
average clinician's world.
You can, and if anyone gets the opportunity to take a peek, you can see what the physicians are being told by looking at something called Up to Date, which is the physician's handbook on what to do. And so when a physician who's maybe an internist or family care gets a fibromyalgia case, they'll go to Up to Date, and it'll say try this first, try this second, try this third. Those three things are the FDA approved medications for fibromyalgia, and so that's what you're probably going to get, and that's totally fair. That those went through a huge process to get to that designation, and then there'll be off-label stuff after that. So if pregabalin didn't work, try gabapentin. So
Hmm.
and there's these list of drugs. Be sure to suggest exercise, and then make sure to see if they can see a psychologist to see if there's any comorbid. So and it's right there. And so yeah, you're going to get that list, and if you don't respond to any of those, some people do, but if you don't, then what happens?
Hmm.
Once they're at the end of that page and Up to Date, and there's no more, they're like, I don't know what we're going to do. That's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to create things to put into that page that they can try that are actually going to work for a large percentage of the patients.
That's awesome, because that's exactly what we need, are the more information out there, more options,
Yeah.
them being aware,
Yes.
and all of that. What role do you think genetics plays in all of this? Because we've talked about a couple of things. Doesn't work for everybody, which makes me think that there's probably something genetically going on. I mean, if fibromyalgia is the same, which is a whole nother topic of conversation.
Yeah.
But so I know there have been some researchers looking at genetic markers and things like that.
Yeah. And I haven't done a lot of that myself. Now I have started working with a team from Hudson Alpha, who are real precision medicine group and genetic group. So I'm learning a lot of this stuff. What we're doing more with chronic fatigue syndrome, that this would work for fibromyalgia as well, is they do, so we do the genetic test, and then their algorithms go through and they go through all the SNPs, all the pieces of genetic code, and then it links back to encyclopedias and libraries about what types of proteins those things encode, and the likelihood that an aberration in that would cause some symptom. And so you feed in all the symptoms, fatigue, pain, it runs the genetics, and it says, oh, wait, we found these two things that have been linked with these symptoms, and it encodes for this protein. So if you're missing it, you're not going to get enough energy to fuel the cell or something like that. It's been wild. I mean, it's my first experience with it, but we ran 10 people, and for probably 4 or 5 of them, they found something that likely causes their symptoms. And in some cases, it looked like fibromyalgia, but it was actually some deficiency in something that muscles need to operate correctly. And it's a rare mutation. And so I could go to that person and say, we just found something that's probably causing all your symptoms. It's not fibromyalgia, it's this other thing. You have a very rare mutation. So if your doctor does this biopsy, he or she can prove if that's the case. And if it is, you can take this thing and you'll feel better. So I think it's really cool. So yeah, a lot of ways to answer that. So I don't think there's one path to fibromyalgia. I do think that we're going to find some people have things that are mimicking fibromyalgia, and if we can do the genetics, we can find those. For the rest, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of gene stuff that comes up. I think of it as so we know that those microglia I've been talking about, they're supposed to have, those receptors are supposed to be the brakes to turn them off. And so we're supposed to be able to turn those off and feel better. People with fibromyalgia are more likely to have a genetic variant where they don't have enough of the receptors. And so they've kind of lost the brakes on those immune cells. That's just one example. And so that was published a couple of years ago, I think. So I think what happens is if you get too many of those, not rare, but infrequent variants, and you get too many of those together, you get something that looks like fibromyalgia. So if you have a little bit extra inflammation, but then you lack the brakes on the things that are supposed to tune it down, then you get like kind of constant inflammation in the brain. So how much is it going to explain? I think it's like you hear with a lot of stuff, it's probably a combination of a particular genetic predisposition, and then the triggers come along. So there may be some people that have the genetic predisposition, but because they didn't get a certain number of infections in a short period of time, or they weren't exposed to a particular mold or environmental toxin, or they didn't have stress at a particular time when their progesterone was low, who knows? All those are feasible. Not making those up. Those are things that can happen. But that combination of susceptibility and those triggers at that unique time is probably what leads to that disorder. And that's why it'll happen people younger, and then some people may get to 55 or 60 because they didn't hit that particular set of triggers to set that in motion. So yeah, I definitely think there's a genetic predisposition. And I think it explains more than half of probably who gets it. But it's not the whole story. I think it's genetics plus something else.
And I think we're finding that with a lot of stuff with genetics, right? That you might have this particular gene, but if you are getting the right nutrients, if you're getting enough sleep, if you're managing your stress, then those things aren't really factors as much anymore.
Right. Yeah. Right. And the unfair part is someone else could do all those things wrong, but because they lucked out on those particular genetic things, they won't develop the disorder. Right. So, yeah, there's definitely a familial component. If you have fibromyalgia, your family members are more likely to have a number of autoimmune disorders. I mean, you're going to see more lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. There's some general connection there. We just haven't nailed down the particular kind of aspects of the genetic code.
So if you were going to categorize fibromyalgia, it seems to come with a lot of other autoimmune type stuff,
Mhm.
but it doesn't seem to totally be autoimmune. Does it
Right.
fall under rheumatology? Does it fall under neurology? Where would you put fibromyalgia with everything that you're learning?
Yeah, that's really, really tough. We have to consider the system that's involved, which I think is the brain, which would lead us more to neurology because rheumatologists don't look at the brain usually. So, they wouldn't be reading, radiological scans. But neurologists, yeah, I think it's most appropriate in neurology more than rheumatology. But really, what I really want to do is make this a disease that's treatable by the primary care physicians, where I would
Yeah.
really love if you don't have to see a specialist. We're talking about 6 million plus people, and going to a specialist is tough. So really want something, and I think that's totally achievable. I think we can make it where you don't have to go to a rheumatologist or a neurologist. Again, if it was something like low-dose naltrexone or dextromethorphan or some of the, we're testing curcumin and stinging nettle and a bunch of botanicals, you don't have to go past that. So I do think that because we can't find damage in the brain, I do think ultimately it will be something that once we have the right tools, someone starts to get it early stage, they'll go to their primary care physician, you'll get this, and it'll prevent it from developing further. I really think that's how it's going to ultimately end up. It's not going to be something where you need brain surgery or things like that. So it won't require that specialist level.
That's great. That's great. That's actually my dream for the
Hmm.
world is that like right now when somebody's diagnosed with fibromyalgia, they're sort of told, well, you know,
Yeah.
like good luck to you. We don't really have much to treat this. Things don't really work all that great. Life as you knew it was over. And it would be awesome if we got to the place where it was like, okay, you have fibromyalgia, but it's not a big deal. Here's what we do.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's
we
great.
we just have to wait. That's the target, and I really do like every day remind myself that that's the goal, and I know we have to go as fast as we can. It's really frustrating to me how getting funding or getting regulatory approvals or slow things down so much, and the ideas I come up with are so fast. I've got like the next 100 things planned out, but it takes so much work to test even one step, and we have to be disciplined and go step by step by step, um, to convince like National Institutes of Health to give us funding. If we go too far out, if I try to go for the far thing, they'll say no, that's too big of a jump. You need to you know shore up
Right.
these ideas first. And so all right, um, but it means when we get there we're going to be really confident. It just really slows things down. But
Is there
yeah.
anything that we can do to help make that process faster? Like, is there anything
Yeah.
advocacy wise or donating funds or like what would make that process faster for you?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking that. That's nice.
Yeah.
So I've been amazed by the advocacy stuff that has been growing. That's huge because the pressure that's being put on federal government, on Congress level. You've seen a lot of stuff with chronic fatigue syndrome in the last few years. All that benefits fibromyalgia as well because when we run participants with the CFS study, half of them are going to be comorbid. They're going to have both. And so we'll say fibromyalgia only, chronic fatigue syndrome only, and both. So all this research helps everybody. Um, that stuff has been really great. I think as someone who runs, so I don't think the animal research is going to push us really far. That's my personal opinion because we don't really have a model that mimics fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. So I think the most important research is going to be done on people, and that means we have to have participants for it. And the hardest thing about running studies is getting willing participants because it's so hard. If you have fibromyalgia, coming into the lab and having these things done, but that's how we make the scientific advancements. So I'd encourage everyone, if you can, if it's not going to be really absolutely disruptive, find out what studies are in your area and see if you can participate in them. That's the big thing, I think.
Right, right. Because you can't research stuff if you don't have anybody to look at.
Right. Yeah, yeah. We need all kinds of different people too. We don't want to just study like one type of person. We don't want to have just a college student who's 20 years old, because that may not be the same for everybody. Or so. Yeah, that's the big thing. Other than that, yeah, if you can, like, the advocacy groups are great, and I don't know how those operate kind of internally or what that looks like from the participant side or patient side, but I know that it's changing things, and the advocacy stuff. I was skeptical a few years ago, but I can absolutely say, yeah, that advocacy is having an effect and actually improves the scientists' ability to create new information. So yeah, I've been really happy with that. I think people can give money to labs directly, but now there's groups that collect that money and they give it to the most high promising studies. So you know, basically every study I've done that's important. So if you look back at low-dose naltrexone, that was started with a really, really small grant, and that was enough to get that going. And so, those groups that collect that money and then give money to groups like me, those have been really important. I mentioned American Fibromyalgia Syndrome Association. They just funded 2 new studies. The NIH probably wouldn't do that because they're too experimental, but these private foundations can take more risks. And so they allow me to do the really kind of out there stuff that I think is going to help, but they're not conservative ideas. So yeah, that's really important.
That's great. That's great. And I know from the people that I work with, just kind of going back just a little bit to the advocacy, um, writing letters, calling your representatives, your senators, that really does help. It just takes longer than you think it does.
Yeah.
Like everything, it all takes
Yeah.
longer than you think it should.
Right. Yes.
But I have heard from those people who are meeting with those individuals that they really do listen to those,
Yeah.
especially if they start getting enough of them. So if any of you out there are interested in helping to further the fibromyalgia research, those are some things you can try.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what research is exciting you the most right now when it comes to fibromyalgia, yours or somebody else's? Or both?
I well, I know I can say which one. Wow, that's actually hard. Even just focusing on ours, trying to think about which one I'm most excited to run. So let me talk about one that, because I was just meeting with the graduate student today, Christina Moeller, who's going to be running the study. We're going to get it started. It was just funded by AFSA, American Fibromyalgia Syndrome Association. So we're going to start it. I think we're going to run it basically in March of next year. It's going to be a lot of regulatory stuff, but we're going to run it in 1 month, and I think it's going to be huge. So there's a chemical called lipopolysaccharide or endotoxin that mimics bacterial infection for a very short period of time. So when you inject someone with it, it tricks your immune system into thinking you've gotten a small immune insult, like you might every single day. So what I think is happening in fibromyalgia is every day we get exposed to little viri, little bacteria, not enough to cause an infection because our immune system kicks in and beats it down. What I think is happening in fibro is those normal exposures are triggering an overly robust immune response, including a central response. So you're basically getting sick all the time because your immune system is overactive. You're not actually getting the infection because it gets beaten down, but you feel horrible. And so you've got this constant struggle between your immune system and either something in your body or something coming from outside. So we tested that by injecting people. We'd bring people with fibromyalgia into the hospital, and we injected them with this little low-level trigger, and we found what we thought we would find. The fibromyalgia patients had an overly robust immune response to it, and they were supposed to produce something called fractalkine to reduce that microglia response in the brain, and they failed to do that. The healthy controls, after about 4 or 5 hours, they ramped up that chemical to push down the microglia response. The fibromyalgia didn't do it. And so it looks like the fibromyalgia patients were lacking the brakes to turn off inflammation in the brain. But we were measuring that in the blood. So that looks great. It's exactly what I thought, but now we have to prove that it's happening in the brain. So what we're going to do in March is that same thing, but we're going to do it in the scanner. So we're going to take people, put them in the MRI scanner. We're going to inject them with that chemical, activate their immune system. And what we expect to find is their brains are going to produce more inflammatory chemicals and not turn off when it's supposed to. I'm almost certain that's what's going to happen, but we have to run it. So we have this scan that can measure brain temperature. And I don't know if you've seen that one. We've published one paper on chronic fatigue syndrome. So we can measure your temperature all throughout your brain. And when you get sick, your brain temperature goes up. And so we're going to measure brain temperature, and we're going to measure some chemicals that get released when you have brain inflammation, like lactate. You should only produce lactate when your brain's driving really, really hard, more so than you can do by thinking. It's usually only neuroinflammation. And now we can measure that in the MRI scanner. So we're going to inject them, measure all these neuroinflammatory markers. And if we find the fibromyalgia patients have that big response in the brain and the healthy controls don't, I think we have our answer right there. It's an abnormal immune reaction to low-level daily insults to the immune system. So I'm excited about that. I'm going to be running all those participants myself, which I usually don't have time to do, but we're going to do this in such a short period of time. And since we're injecting some kind of stuff that you have to monitor medically, we'll all be there for like 10 days, all day, running this study as fast as we can. So yeah, I'm excited about that because, I really want to run that study that's going to give that definitive, objective answer that there's no question. It's like, yes, the patients did this, the controls did this. That's what the problem is, and we know what that means.
That's exciting. And
Yeah.
what you're describing there makes sense to me as a fibro person. Like I've always thought of fibromyalgia as an amplifier, right? Like
Yes.
we
Yeah. Right.
experience a normal thing, but then it gets amplified to
Yes.
high pain or high fatigue or whatever. And this sounds like the exact same kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah. And the only question I think is whether that trigger is external or it's internal. So it's possible you could have an infection. Like, for example, if you get, chickenpox, right? That virus, once you've had chickenpox, that virus hides next to your spinal cord your entire life, and it comes out later as shingles if your immune system gets suppressed. But if you have chickenpox, you live your life with that virus. Our immune system keeps it in check all the time, unless you get immune suppression, but it has to fight to do that. So it could be that some people with fibromyalgia, what they're feeling is that daily battle between that virus that's always trying to get out and the immune system keep trying to tamp it down. A healthy person has that too, but since it's not amplified, like you say, they don't feel it. It just happens behind the curtains.
Right.
Fibromyalgia, they may feel it every time that happens. Now that's a potential. We haven't tested that, but we're working with a group. I don't know if they know I can mention them, so I'll hold off on that right now. But we're going to send them blood samples of fibromyalgia patients over months, longitudinal samples. No one else has a sample set like this, and they're going to measure the levels of all these viruses that stick in our system to measure those low-level concentrations to see if when fibromyalgia patients have flares, is that when that virus started to try to replicate. And wow, I don't know what's going to happen, but if that works out, that's going to be really, really important.
That's exciting. Yeah. So what research do you think we should be spending more time and money on besides just yours?
Yeah, that's an easy answer, right?
What I should say, what things do you think we should be studying and spend more time and money on?
So, I'm now mostly convinced that this is brain inflammation. So any approach to handling brain inflammation, those microglia cells, research going into how do we get those microglia cells to the state we want them in, that's huge. Other than that, I want to see more research on the things that people can do right now. So I think those are the two things. I want to see a lot of research on how do we correct the fundamental problem, but then until we do that, what are the behavioral things we can do? What are the environmental things we can do to at least get people to the point where they can live functional lives and accomplish most of their goals? Because that's what all this is about. And without having to struggle every day with it. And so I want to see more dietary stuff. I want to see more botanical stuff. Can you take these botanicals and reduce your symptoms by 50%? That would be a huge thing. Um, are there, what else is possible? You know, there's all these kind of interesting treatment options, like now there's non-invasive vagus nerve stimulators that I'm really interested. I don't know if you follow that, but we've known for a long time that if you have fibromyalgia and you do a vagus nerve implant stimulator, that can really help. The problem is it's invasive, and so it wasn't worth it. But now there's non-invasive devices that you can accomplish the same thing with no implants, and a person can do that at home. Does that work for fibromyalgia? If it should, because it is anti-inflammatory in the brain, and it can help correct sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous ratio. Both of those can be very good for fibromyalgia for a number of different reasons. So yeah, we need to test that device. You may be able to treat it without even taking medicine. Use it once or twice a day and have sustained benefits. So we need to do those clinical trials. So I'm trying to get my graduate students to, they have to do their thesis and dissertation. I'm trying to say, okay, you got to do a thesis dissertation anyway. Why don't we do it on a potential cool treatment? Let's just do a clinical trial, try it out, and see if we get something. So that's part of my daily work to get the students doing. So if we can run more clinical trials and get more things tested. So those are the types of things, and we'll do some of them. But then, wow, there's so many people researching fibromyalgia, and there's so much I can't even keep up with what everyone's doing. So that's the good news, is that a lot of people are dedicating their whole careers to fibromyalgia, and so it's definitely got attention. I don't know who's going to come up with that answer first. There's a lot of competition, but somebody's going to do it.
That's a race I'm happy to support.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. So I thought of something while you were talking. A couple episodes ago, I had the founder of Oscar Wellness did an interview with them. They do a PEMF device. And I was curious if you guys have ever looked at that for, because it does help with inflammation. And
what does that stand for?
It's pulsed electromagnetic fields. So it's the same thing they use for like regrowing bone or some of those.
Is that done like on a bed, body wide, or is there?
This is actually a small device.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So it's something that people can use at home. I know they've used it for years in doctors' offices, but this is actually a home device. I'll shoot you the links you can take.
Yeah. So I can't speak to that. Just haven't looked at. So, I have to read a published clinical trial and kind of scrutinize it. So I don't know if they've actually published on it. Certainly there's a lot of neuromodulatory stuff like a transcranial magnetic stimulation. That's a more powerful one. You can't do that at home. It's like a $50,000 really, really strong magnet that, goes right through your skull and changes neuronal functioning. Those can help. Then there's, transcranial direct current stimulation. That's something you can do at home. And of course, there's all kinds of stimulators. So I think the question is where to put that. Is it vagus nerve? Is it spinal stuff? Do you go to the brain directly? If it's the brain, where in the brain? And there are many groups working on that stuff. So I've kind of left the neuromodulation to other groups because they're doing such a good job, and we'll get the answers on whether those work. But yeah, I don't know how efficacious the PMF is.
Okay. Cool. I just thought I'd ask. So where do you think we're going in the next, say, 5 to 10 years? What's your prediction for the future of fibromyalgia?
So I believe that, we've been researching this a long time, but in talking with my colleagues, I feel like a lot of the lines of research that were in their infancy a few years ago are now getting to kind of their payoff. And I feel like 5 to 7 years is the time frame where there's going to be a really big kind of groundbreaking result. And people, they probably said that 20 years ago as well, but there really feels like there's something different. There's a maturation of the fields, whereas other people, before they were just throwing out ideas. Most of them were wrong, but now we're starting to get consensus on what areas of the body to look at, and things are converging now. So I really feel like we're getting close. So that's one thing. I think one of the trends, I think one of the things that have hurt the field in general is treating fibromyalgia as a single disease. Because when you do that and you look at patients versus controls, if only a third of the patients have that thing, and you do patients controls, you may not notice the difference because it may wash out if you have too many people. So I really think the field's going to benefit from subgroup analyses and realizing that maybe for a third of fibromyalgia patients, it is some type of autoimmune, but maybe in a third, it's some type of chronic infectious thing. And maybe for a third, it's something else. And now enough researchers appreciate that that's the case. So I don't think they're making that mistake of throwing away good ideas just because it doesn't work for everybody. So that's something we're going to see change. So I think there's going to be a major breakthrough, but then also I think we're going to get more sophisticated at chopping away at the patient group and saying, okay, we may not be able to cure 100%, but hey, this works for 25%. Now we've got them handled. Now let's see what's left. Here's 75%.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next thing? I think that's the way it's going to work, because I think we're going to find a handful of major things that are going to be treated differently that's causing the same set of symptoms. And we have to start thinking that way to really handle the problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've thought for quite a while now that in my lifetime we're going to see this thing called fibromyalgia being divided up.
Yes.
Just working with enough clients over the last 10 years and watching how different people respond, it just seems a little bit like maybe diabetes or something, where we've got, two things that are called the same that have similar symptoms but different actual
Yeah, right.
causes.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
Yeah. So we might have different types of fibromyalgia, or we may come up with new names for new things we discover. But I agree
Yeah.
with you that we're going to start seeing that divided up. And it makes sense that that would affect the research too, right? Because if you have a lot of this particular group over here and not as many of this group over here, and it just
Yeah.
helps one of those groups, then it looks like it didn't really work when it actually did.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And the problem is for large clinical trials, you have to have an overall group effect. You could have a third of people that have a great response, and then that may not meet the FDA requirements and I think we need to change that thinking. I mean, if you have a drug that works for even 10%, that's that's a lot of people. And so I think we should have as many tools as possible. As long as they're not dangerous treatments to try, we might as well give them a shot. A lot of these have low side effects. And so we should give them a shot. So yeah, I think that's going to be true. I think ultimately I would love in 10 or 15 years to not even have fibromyalgia as a diagnosis, because we've understood all the subgroups and we've given them appropriate names based on the pathology. And so that's when we're done, is when there's no more fibromyalgia diagnosis. It's chronic, herpes virus infection, or it's a microglia activation dysfunction and something like that. So it's a long way to go to that. And maybe there'll be a group where fibromyalgia will always be descriptive. I mean, it's still helpful, but really want to carve those out to beat the problem. It's divide and conquer, I think.
Yes, yes. I love that. I love that. So there have been a lot of things that we've talked about for patients, like getting involved with studies, getting involved with advocacy. Do you have any particular resources that might be helpful for patients if they want to participate in some of this?
Yeah, let me think of some ideas. So one good place to start is clinicaltrials.gov. If you've never gone to that, it's a federal site. Any US-based researcher who's being serious about their work should register their study with clinicaltrials.gov, and you should be able to search for it. And so if you go to clinicaltrials.gov, put in fibromyalgia, you should see all the actively recruiting clinical trials and find out if there's something close enough to you to go to. So that's the best resource for that. If you're if you're not close to a major institution, academic institution, yeah, it can be hard to participate. Unfortunately, we usually don't have budgets in the NIH budgets to fly people in.
Right.
And I wish we could, because we get people all over the country that would actually do that, a lot of work to come in, but we'd need the budget to do that. So, and some of the studies are kind of long, so that's hard to do. So yeah, check clinicaltrials.gov. What's another good resource? You could possibly there's a site called NIHreporter.gov. And I can send you this. You can put it in a link somewhere where you can see all the grants. Yeah,
I was
sure,
just going to say,
definitely.
we'll put it all in the show notes. So that'd be great if you want to send it.
And that's a site that has every researcher that's got funding for whatever, it lists it. And so you can check that too, put in fibromyalgia, and then you can see by geographic region, hey, is there an institution 45 minutes away that's got this cool fibromyalgia study? So that's, I think that's the best way. There's not a really good resource for connecting patients with particular clinical trials that I know of. Maybe they exist, but we don't use them. So yeah, I wish we could improve that communication.
Yeah, that would be great. I know you guys have a great Facebook page. Do you announce your studies on there? Is that a way?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And
if someone, so I know for sure, if you want to stay on top of what we're doing, the Facebook page, you can do that. So any new study I start, we'll put the link for how you can screen to see if you're eligible for it. And then keep on the news, and I put the preliminary data on there so you can see the results there as much as I can talk about first. So that's the ideal way just for my lab.
Yeah. Perfect. And for those of us with fibromyalgia, especially if they're in your area, you're in Alabama, right?
Yeah. Birmingham, Alabama, kind of center of the state.
Yeah.
So for most studies, yeah, if you're within 2 to 3 hours, because sometimes there's a few visits, that's usually pretty doable. Outside of that, it's kind of a case-by-case basis. But definitely, someone's in Alabama, we've got all these brain imaging studies coming up. We have clinical trials, so there's a lot of things to participate in.
Awesome. Now, I know a lot of times when I talk to people about clinical trials, there's some hesitation. Would you just talk directly to those people who are thinking, I don't know?
Yeah, it's a good point. So, I guess they can sound scary. So, there's a pro and a con to clinical trials. So the obvious pro is you're getting something that could really help before most people can ever have a chance to try it. That's really cool. You could get something that could help you 5 years before it would otherwise be available to you. The downside is it's experimental, and so we don't have all the information about what a side effect could be or what it could do. So I think it's so rare now for the steps involved that you don't see to get to the point where we're doing a clinical trial in people. There's so many steps, and there's so many government entities making sure that this is safe, that it is really hard to find something like for fibromyalgia that's going to cause problems. We detect that way before, and usually there's smaller trials before, and animal stuff and in vitro stuff and toxicology stuff. So if there's something on clinicaltrials.gov and you're thinking about participating, you're probably going to be safe to take that. Now, the downside of a clinical trial is it's not individualized to you. So, if you go to your physician, they can titrate your dose or, raise it or lower it, because your clinician is about helping you as a person. A clinical trial is about finding out something from the population. So we can only give one dosage. We're not allowed to change it. So it won't be as tailored for you. So there are some downsides, but I think usually when it gets to that point, we're pretty confident that it's going to do something. I know for our lab, we won't put forward any treatment that has any serious adverse events. That's not what I want to do. I don't know if other groups would do that, but if there's any evidence that it's actually going to cause problems, then that's a no-go. So I think most people that do our clinical trials have a really good experience. We try to make it really easy. So, you'll get capsules of something. You may not know what it is. So it may be placebo for part of the time, and it may be the active drug. And so that may be a downside is, like, am I on the drug or not? But you can trust us. We've set it up so when we're at the end, we can tell you, here's when you're on placebo, here's when you're on drug, here's how you responded. And then a lot of clinical trials, if it ended up working for you, there's ways where you might be able to get that medication without, even though it's not commercialized yet. And so certainly if someone goes through our clinical trials, we try to find a way to get them that drug if it worked for them really well. So I think the pros outweigh the cons for the individual. But the real big thing is if people don't participate in those trials, we can't go forward with treatments. I mean, that's the end of it. We have to do those to get the information out. So, it's critically important to developing the new treatments.
Absolutely. And I think that I hear so many fibro patients who are all saying we need better options, but we can't have better options unless we show up as patients for those tests, to let you guys use us as human guinea pigs to try those things out. Like it's the only way it's going to happen. So for those of you, if you're near Birmingham, make sure you connect up with Dr. Younger. We'll also have those other links out on the show notes so that you can check those out. And I think that's really important. So any last thoughts that you have or you want to share about the work you're doing or research in general?
Wow. There's so much to talk about. We touched on some really good things. So I think we did a good job talking about with a focus on kind of the new things that are coming up, which is what I like as a scientist. It's what I like to focus on. I think in terms of a kind of an overall thing, and I've said this before through different venues, but I look at brain images all the time in all kinds of different ways, different modalities, and I have still never seen anything that suggests that there's any true damage occurring that's lasting. And so, again, I've said it before, but really, really, and I'm saying this as someone who actually goes in and looks at the stuff. We look at the function of the brain. I truly believe that once we reverse that process in someone, they can go back to being the way they were before. And so, you may have heard of a couple of imaging studies where they say, oh, the brain is shrinking faster or something, but that's kind of hyperbolic. And when I go in and look at it, it's nothing like what it's being purported to be. Extremely, extremely minor stuff on small sample sizes. So the collective evidence, I don't see anything suggesting it's neurodegenerative, it's destructive. It's not even like rheumatoid arthritis where you get joints broken down. It is a physiological thing that amplifies signals that can be corrected, and then you will feel better again. So as soon as we can get that tool to people where they can use, I think we'll just wipe out the problem.
That's awesome. And I'm really glad you brought that up because I do talk to a lot of people who are worried, especially with the brain fog that we get where we can't remember things and we say the wrong words and we put our keys in the fridge and, it's like, oh no, is this something like Alzheimer's, right?
Right. And that's not the case. If someone who doesn't have fibromyalgia, if you get a horrible case of the flu, you can't think, you can't plan. That's a chemical thing. It doesn't mean that your neurons are being killed or anything. That's what those microglia do to force you to not want to do anything. That whole process that you feel when you have fibromyalgia, that is an evolutionarily conserved process to make you want to get in bed or get on the couch and rest. So it makes it hard to do everything, but it's just a chemical thing. There's nothing being destroyed. It's designed to get you to lay down so your body can fight off this infection. But in the case of fibromyalgia, it's activated when it shouldn't be. So your body's acting like it needs to fight off an infection, even though there may not be an infection. And so you feel like you're sick all the time and you suffer all those consequences. But if we get those cells back to the normal state, those symptoms go away. And that includes the cognitive symptoms as well.
That's awesome. I love that. And I'm one of those people who've always used that as an example when people say, whoa, what does fibromyalgia feel like? And I always use the example of, those days when you have the flu and like your hair hurts and your eyelashes hurt and you get tired just going from your bed to the couch. Like that's what it's like. And you're saying that actually is what it is.
Yeah, yes. I'm almost totally convinced that's what it is. It's the same thing. It's just chronically turned on in fibromyalgia.
So fascinating. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here, but I just want to say anytime, you are welcome back anytime. Anytime you want to share new research, or if you are looking for people, do let me know. I would be happy to share that on the podcast and let people know that you're looking for people too.
Great. Will do.
All right. Thanks.
All right. See ya.
I hope you guys found Dr. Younger's information as interesting as I did. I think he is doing a lot of really good work for us with fibromyalgia. I really appreciate his focus and his passion and just all the work that he's doing to not just find ways for us to cope, but actually find ways for us to get better, which, as you guys know, that's the whole focus of this podcast. So I just wanted to reiterate a couple of the websites that Dr. Younger mentioned. First is, of course, his Facebook page. And to be honest with you guys, it's a really long link with several words and even a few numbers at the end. So rather than trying to give that to you by audio, I would love for you to just go to fibromyalgiapodcast.com and go to episode number 21, so fibromyalgiapodcast.com/21, and you will find all of the links, including the link to his Facebook page, the Facebook page for the lab. Another website he mentioned was Up to Date, which is the website that doctors use to look up different treatment protocols for particular conditions. They do have subscriptions out there, including subscriptions for patients and caregivers. So if you're interested in that, the website is uptodate.com, just all spelled out, uptodate.com. Dr. Younger also mentioned a couple websites where you can find out about potential research studies. One of them is clinicaltrials.gov. That's where you can go out and look up if there are any trials in your area. He also mentioned the NIH research report, and that website is actually report.nih.gov, which is a little bit different than he said in the interview. So that is the National Institutes of Health Research Portfolio Online Reporting Tools is its official name. And again, that website is report.nih.gov. He also mentioned the American Fibromyalgia Syndrome Association, which is the organization that has funded some of his research studies. If you are interested in checking them out, their website is afsafund.org. That's AFSA, as in American Fibromyalgia Syndrome Association. Fund, like fundraising or to fund a project. That is afsafund.org. We also talked about a lot of Dr. Younger's research studies, and we will have links to all of those on the show notes page as well. So just fibromyalgiapodcast.com/21. You will see those links out there, including the links to the research he has done on low-dose naltrexone, the research on inflammation in the brain. All of those things will be out there. Keep in mind that some of the research Dr. Younger mentioned hasn't actually been published yet. So if there are any things we discussed that you don't find in the show notes, that is probably why. Some of the research, such as the studies that are coming up in the spring and the summer, obviously there's nothing I can link to yet. So just stay tuned. We will likely have Dr. Younger back on here at some point to discuss the findings of those. But you remember, you can also follow him and his research on his Facebook page. So again, fibromyalgiapodcast.com/21 to get all of those links, both to the research and to be able to follow him on Facebook. I also wanted to just mention a couple of the episodes that are coming up. Next episode will be your holiday survival guide. I know for some of you listening, your holidays may have already started if you are outside the US, or depending on your family traditions and religious followings. Some of those have already started, but we are going to be talking about ways that you can get through these next couple of hectic months with Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and all the things. We'll be talking about that next episode. I want to give you some tips and some tricks and some ways that you can plan out your holiday season in a way that both serves your heart and your body. So things that are both kind to you and manage your fibromyalgia, and also provide what you need emotionally, physically, with your family, all of that. So we will have that next episode. Episode 22 will be your holiday survival guide. And then episode 23, if all goes as planned, I have several of my coaches coming out for our annual alumni retreat. That is happening in just a couple of weeks. And while they are here, I plan on doing some interviews. So you guys can meet a few of the coaches that I've trained, hear about the work that they're doing, the work that they do with their clients, and the kinds of things that they've been able to accomplish with their clients in helping them feel better. I've got some really great gals coming out who have very different kinds of things that they do with their clients. So I'm looking forward to having you guys meet them virtually by way of interview here on the podcast. In the next couple of months, of course, we've got New Year's, which will be a great time to talk about things like setting goals and exercising with fibromyalgia. It seems like January, everybody gets the urge to head back to the gym. And I just wanted to let you guys know that there are very specific ways that you should and shouldn't exercise when it comes to fibromyalgia. So we will definitely be discussing that in a future episode, probably around the new year. And we'll be talking with a professional athlete who has fibromyalgia about her journey and the work that she does helping fibromyalgia patients get stronger again and exercise properly. Your doctor is right. Exercise does help fibromyalgia. However, your doctor has probably not told you how to do that properly. And there really is a good and a bad way to exercise with fibromyalgia. So we'll be discussing that and giving you some tips on how to do that in a way that helps you and not hurts you. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.